When you spawn any object into your game scene, you are instantiating a new object. Instantiating can be an expensive process within your game and can hinder the performance. Because of this, we create a system to instantiate or spawn a set amount of objects when the game is launched. And rather than creating a new object every single time, we simply recycle the ones that we've already spawned. This approach is called object pooling. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to create your own object pooling system within Unity. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another video. I am your friendly grey-haired developer, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to create your own object pooling system within Unity. You can think of an object pooling system the same as an actual swimming pool, where it's the lifeguard's job to blow up an inflatable for every child that arrives at the pool. So a child arrives, the lifeguard blows up an inflatable, passes it to the child goes in the water. When the child is ready to come out, he deflates the inflatable and takes it back to the lifeguard. Then another kid comes along and the lifeguard will then go ahead and inflate another one, and so on and so forth. With object pooling, the lifeguard would initially blow up 10, maybe 20 inflatables and put them in a queue. As every child comes to take a swim, they would take one of the inflatables, they would go and have their swim, and when they come out, they would put their inflatable back to the back of the queue, therefore allowing a continuous use of those inflatables within the pool. It's the exact same thing with game development. Every time we instantiate an object such as a bullet or a rocket or a cube, a wall, any kind of object that we have in our game scene, you instantiate an object, which is creating an instance of an object within your game. If those objects can be destroyed or they can be used somewhere later on in the game, then it's in your interest to actually make those reusable. So what we can do is we can create a queuing system where we add the objects in straight at the start of the game. Every time one of them is used, we deactivate the object, put it to the back of the queue, and then when it's ready to be used again, we reactivate that same object. So this is what we're going to do. So here you can see I've just set up a new project within Unity, and I'm going to create a new empty object, which we will call object pool. We will then create a new scripts folder within our project. And within that, we'll create a new C# script, and we'll call that object pooler. Next, we will go ahead and we will open this up in Visual Studio. Let me just switch to that. And you can see we've got a blank file here. So I'll go ahead, clear all of this out from there. We don't need any of that. And what we also need to do, which we'll do shortly, is we will be changing this from a mono behavior to a singleton class. I like to create a new version called a mono singleton, which allows me to create singletons as and when I need them within the app. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a pool for us to start adding things to. So the first thing I do is I want this to be serializable, so I'm going to make that system.serializable. And then I'm going to do a public class, and we'll call this pool. And within the pool, we want a couple of different variables. We want a public string, and we will call this the pool tag. And then we want an actual game object itself. So we're gonna say public game object, and this is going to be a prefab. So we'll call this a pool prefab. And then we need to give every pool a size so we know how many elements we're going to be having inside it. So for that, we will just go ahead and we'll create an integer, which will be just simply pool size. That's pretty much all we need for the actual serializable class itself. So the next thing we need to do is create an array, so a list of all of the pools that we're able to create. And then we need to be able to create multiple instances of those pools and have them all contained within the object pooler. So what we need to do first and foremost is we need to create a public list of type pool from the class that we've just created above. And we will call this object pools. And below this, we need to create something now called a dictionary. So within the dictionary, what we want to do is we want to give it a string, which is a tag, which is the pool tag. So it's something that we're able to query an item from the dictionary by. So if we give an object a tag of cube, and we give another one a tag of circle, we're able to pull a circle and a cube out just by passing over the actual tag as a string. So what I need to do here is create a new string. And then we want to add these items into a queue. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a queue of game objects. And we are going to call this our pool dictionary. Now, when we need this to run as soon as the game loads, as we're going to spawn all of our items in before anything else happens. So we do need to create our start method, which is the I don't know what's happened there. Which is the default method that happens every time a script is called within Unity. Start actually gets hit. So what we want to do in here is we want to initialize our pool dictionary. And we're going to do that by creating a new pool dictionary. Sorry, a new dictionary. And you can see it's already generated everything we need. So we've created a new pool dictionary, and we have a string which we're going to be passing our tag, and we have a queue of individual game objects. Now these are going to be the actual pools themselves. So what we need to do now is we need to make sure that if we add more than one pool, we're able to actually loop through all of those when the game loads to make sure that we spawn every object that we need to spawn. So we're going to do that within a simple for each loop, and we're going to take our pool class from above, and we're going to say for every pool inside our object pools array, which is our list. And what this is going to do is it's going to loop through every single item we've got inside our list of object pools, and it's going to allow us to then start adding extra queues for all of these. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new queue, and we're going to create a queue of, not game dev HQ, of game objects. And then what we're going to do is we'll call this object pool. And then from here, we're just going to create a new queue. And then I'll close that off. Now within this, we have to check within every item that we have inside each of these pools. So that's going to be the pool size. So we're going to create another for loop. And this time we're going to say if int I equals 0. And then we need to make sure that I is less than our pool dot size. And then we have to just increment every time we go through it. We then need to start creating our game objects within this loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new game object, and this time we're going to call it a pool object. And we're going to simply instantiate this. This is where we instantiate all of our objects. We still have to instantiate them, but we do it at the start of the game rather than every single time one is requested. So we go ahead and do that. And we say it's going to be from our pool, and it's our pool prefab that we associate with every individual pool. From here, we then want to go ahead and we want to set our object as active, because at this point we're wanting to actually spawn the object. So we say set active, and we set this to true. Actually, no, what we want to do is we want to set that to false initially because we just want to spawn them, we don't want to actually use them. So then what we want to do is we take our pool from the object pool, and we simply enqueue. Now this is part of the queue system, and it enables us to set this object into the actual queue. So I'm just going to go ahead and what do we call it? Object pool. Excuse my typing today. I'm not used to typing and recording videos at the same time, so it's getting me a bit nervous. So after here, we now need to go into our dictionary and we need to start adding these items into the dictionary. So we say pool dictionary dot add, and then what we say is our pool dot tag. This is where we set our tags, and then from there we say our object pool. Now this adds an item into the dictionary, which you can see here, and as we spoke about before, it gives it a tag. And it also gives it a queue for every individual pool that we have within the system. So this allows us to have multiple pools of multiple objects, multiple prefabs, and this class will take care of every single one of them for us. So the next thing that we want to do is we want the ability to go ahead and actually spawn any of these items when we want to spawn them. So what we need to do here is we need to say public, and we want to return the actual game object from this method. So we will call it public game object, and we will say spawn from the pool. Now inside here we want to give it our tag. So we're going to say string tag, and then we're going to give it a position. So we want this to be a vector3. And we'll call that position. And then what we want to do is we want to give it a rotation. In most cases, we may not want to rotate it at all. So by default, we'll probably be sending over quaternion identity. But for now, let's just set this up to be a quaternion. And then we're just going to call this rotation. Okay, now inside here, we want to say if our pool dictionary, let me just put a space there, we want to make sure first and foremost that if somebody's trying to spawn something that isn't actually in our object pooler, that we cater for that and we make sure that the app just doesn't, or the game just doesn't crash out. So the best way of us doing that is by saying if our pool dictionary does not contain the key, that's this exclamation mark here is to say if this is not. So if it does not contain the key, which in this instance is our tag. Now this will enable us to catch this issue before we actually go ahead and do anything else. So what we can do in here is we can just, for now, we can return null because we're not going to be returning a game object because there is no game object to return. And anything that we do below this line now will only get hit if the actual tag is a valid tag within the system. So what we need to do is we need to create a vector3, and this is going to be our position, but as we're spawning from the pool, this could be an object that's already spawned previously. So what we need to do is make sure that we reset the position of every object that we spawn. So within here, we'll just simply call this our object reset position, and then we're going to say new vector3, and we're going to take our current position that's being passed into this method, and we're going to say our position dot x, our position dot y, and then our position dot z. And then we're just going to go ahead and close that off. And then we're going to create a new game object. And we're going to call this our object to spawn. And inside here, we're going to go into the pool dictionary. And we're going to call by our tag. So this is going to query the pool dictionary by the tag. And then we're going to dequeue. Now this takes the item out of the actual queue and enables us to actually use this object. So I'm just going to take that out there. And then what we're going to do is we then want this object, because we're spawning the object, we then want to make this active. So we're going to say object to spawn. My typing is terrible today. We're going to say object to spawn and set active, and we're going to set that to true. And then we're going to set the transform. So we're going to say object to spawn again. And we're going to say the transform dot position equals our position that we've passed up into the method above. Object reset, and I've just noticed that I've got a typo in here, so I'm just going to go ahead and change that to reset position and continue this. So that's our reset position. So that sets everything back to, well, you'll see shortly when we actually spawn an object, we'll be setting that to be the position that we actually want to spawn it at. And then from here, what we're then going to do is we're going to do the rotation as well. So we're going to say object spawn dot transform dot rotation, and we're just going to set that to the rotation that we pass within the method. And then what we're going to do is, once we've spawned this object, we now know that we can add the object to the back of the queue so it can be reused again later on. If we don't do this, it will take we've already dequeued an item, so it'll take one item out of the queue and it won't be able to be reused later on. So let's go to pull dictionary. And the same way where we've actually gone ahead and we've dequeued the item here, we're going to put it back in and we're going to give it the tag. And again, whereas up here we have the enqueue, which adds it to the queue, we're going to do the same thing again here to add it back. So we're going to say enqueue. And there we go, we have that. Now what we're going to do is we're simply going to return. If you noticed at the top of the method here, we want to return a game object. So we're going to return our object to spawn. And then inside this method here, we just want to give this our object to spawn to make sure that it puts it back in. And there we go. And that's pretty much all we're going to need for our actual object pool class. So what we need to do now is we need to shift back to Unity. And I'm going to take this script, just let it compile. And I'm going to take this script and I'm going to add it onto our object pool game object that we set up here. Now, once I select this in the hierarchy, you can see that we now have an object pools object here within the script, and we have a size. Now, I can set this to be as many pools as I wish within the game. For this one, we're going to actually just go ahead and do one. Which you will then see we then have this new element, and inside each element we now have a dictionary, which gives us the ability to set a tag, an actual prefab, and how many of those prefabs we want to instantiate within that queue. So for this, we are going to let's set the tag to be explosions, and I'm going to set a pool size to be 20. And then for our pool prefab, what I'm actually going to do is use one that I'm going to download from Game Dev HQ Filebase. So I'm going to go to Filebase. Okay, now Filebase is a part of Game Dev HQ. If you have a subscription to Game Dev HQ training courses, you also get the ability to latch on to their assets software, which automatically includes itself within Unity, where it enables you to download a ton of models that you're able to use within inside your projects. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you've probably heard me talking about it before, but it's a great piece of software. The amount of things you can get from here is absolutely insane, so be sure to check that out if you can. I will leave a link for that in the description below, and I'm not sponsored by them. This is something that I use, so I'm just telling you about it. So inside here, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to search for explosion. And you can see that we have several different listings that come up. And for this one, I'm going to choose, let's have a look. Let's choose explosion 9. I'm going to go ahead and download this object, and what will happen then is it will allow me to import it into my scene. Okay, so now inside our Game Dev HQ folder, we will now see that we have, inside our VFX folder, we have particles, we have explosions. Now, if I drill down into this and we look at the prefabs here, if I double click on this prefab, there we go. So let me just go ahead and zoom out. And you can see there, if I just go ahead and restart this, you'll see it's a great looking explosion from Game Dev HQ. Now, what I'm going to do in this tutorial is the objects that I'm going to be spawning, let me just turn looping off there, are going to be multiple explosions just along the screen, just to demonstrate how the object pool actually works. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my assets and I'm going to create a new folder for prefabs. So I'm going to take the prefab from Game Dev HQ right here. I'm going to move that over into my prefabs just so I can keep things a bit tidier. And then I'm going to give this a new name of explosion. And this is now going to be our prefab that we're going to use within our object pool. So I go back into my object pool object and I look here and I can see that I've got a pool tag of explosions. So I'm actually going to make that capitalized because I like to keep things consistent. And I'm going to drag my prefab over into here. Now this is going to, I've set this at 20. In fact, I'll go 30 on that. Let's make a few more. And now what you're going to see is that when I actually run the game, you're actually going to see inside the hierarchy here several items, which you can see, all of these explosions are all appearing within our hierarchy. Now there's 30 items in here, so our object pooler is fully working. It's automatically instantiating all of these objects for us as soon as the game loads. But now we need to be able to use each of these individually, and then as we use one, take it out of the queue, then put it to the back of the queue as a fresh item so that we can continuously use this queue of items right here. And we do that. I'm going to set that up by a simple press of the spacebar to actually spawn one of the items. Once an item has been spawned, I'm going to set a coroutine to actually just deactivate the object after the duration, which in this instance is 5 seconds. So after 5 seconds, the object will actually be deactivated and it will be put back into the back of the queue here. And then we should be able to see the object pool working properly. The more that I actually press space, you'll see all of these items down here constantly being used and then re-adding themselves back to the queue. So let's go ahead and do that. So on our camera, we're going to add a new script. So I'm going to go into script and I'm going to create new C# script, and we're going to call this actions. And this is going to be responsible for just simply managing when we hit the spacebar, we're going to spawn an object. So let's go ahead and go into here. Okay, and now you can see inside here we have our start and we have our update. For this particular demonstration, I only need to have our update. And I also need to have in here a reference to our object pooler. So I'm going to say public object pooler. And I'm just going to call this pooler for now. And this will enable us to set within the inspector the actual object pooler itself. And then what I'm going to say within the update is if, and we're going to say if we want to make it when the space bar is hit. So we say if input dot get key down, and inside here we just simply want to put space. Now this makes sure that anything, as soon as the spacebar is hit, anything inside this if condition is now going to get called. And in this instance, what we have to do is we have to spawn an object from the object pooler. So from here, we want to go pooler. And now we want to spawn from the pool. And if you remember the parameters that we had inside here before, we have a string, which is a tag, we have a position, and we have a quaternion rotation, which is just the rotation of the item. So what I want to do here is, we know that the only items that we've got in our pools right now are the explosions. So I'm going to give it a tag of explosion. And we want to give this a new vector position. So let's say vector 3. And we're just going to add this to the center for now. So we'll say 0f, 0f, 0f. And then we want to give it, we'll just give it a default rotation right now, which is quaternion.identity. And we want to make that a new vector. And this is really all we need to do in order to spawn an individual item from the queue into the actual system for us to go ahead and use. So what I want to do here, though, is I want to actually get a reference to this in case I need to actually set anything else on it later on. So I'm going to go ahead and say, my typing is absolutely terrible today. I'm going to call it explosion. And that just enables us to get a reference to the actual explosion itself. So if I just go ahead and save this, and I go back to Unity, just let this compile. Now, inside our main camera, you see we've got the action script in there. We now have a space to add our object pooler. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that across over into there. Well, I'm not going to go ahead and drag it into there, but I should be able to. Sorry, I was doing it completely wrong. I was trying to drag the script in, and it was the actual object, the game object up here, so my bad. I'm a little bit nervous recording one of these tutorial videos. It's the first one that I've done, so you just have to bear with me. Okay, so let me go ahead now and just hit play. Now you can see up here we now have 30 of these items. And if I go ahead and hit space, you'll see that absolutely nothing happens. Now, I've just realized there are two reasons for this. Our pool tag is not explosion, it's explosions. So let's change that to explosion and save. And if we go back into Visual Studio, you can see that I've now changed space to non-capital S. Very simple things to get wrong, and I do it a lot. So let's go back into Unity. And now you'll see if I go ahead and hit play, what's going to happen here when I press space, I'll press it once, is you'll see we now have an explosion that's being spawned, and this item at the top here is now being highlighted. Now, the reason that's highlighted is because it's now active. And if I go ahead and just hit space a couple more times, you'll see that more and more of these items are now being activated at the same time, and you can see our queue is actually working as it's going down the list one by one. But what happens when I go down the entire list to the bottom at the moment? So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we've now spawned all 30 of these explosions. And if I hit space again, nothing happens. And that is because what we haven't done yet is we haven't gone ahead and set these explosions to be inactive. So whilst they are able to be set up here to be used, they're not inactive, so they can't be reused from the queue because they're not inactive. So let's go ahead and set up a coroutine that will automatically do that for us. So let's go back into Visual Studio. And then what I'm going to do inside here is I'm going to set up a coroutine, and I'm going to call a numerator, and I'm going to call this set inactive explosion. And then what we're going to do in this is we're going to say yield new, return, wait for seconds, and we're going to give this our seconds, which is actually 5 seconds as per the actual. What am I doing here? I've got this the wrong way around. So it's yield, return, new, wait for seconds, and we're going to give that 5. So this is how long the explosion prefab actually takes to play out. Once we've actually done that, once we've gone past 5 seconds, what we're actually going to do is we're just going to set explosion. What we need inside here first, though, is we need to have our game object. And we'll call this explosion. And we need to set our explosion to set active, and we need to say false. And what that's going to do is it's just going to, inside our queue, it's going to tell the queue that this item has now been used. It's gone past its 5 seconds, so it can now be set as disabled. But of course, we need to be able to get this reference of the game object into our coroutine here. So we can do that very simply by saying start coroutine. And inside here, we're just going to say set inactive explosion. And we're going to set that to our instance of explosion, which is held just right here. Now I'm going to switch back to Unity. Okay, now if I go ahead and press play, you'll see our top explosion here, which is the first one in the queue right here. Is we're going to hit this, and that's going to set itself active. And then within 5 seconds, if you just watch, you'll see it now disables itself. So what we're now able to do is we're now able to spawn any of these objects, and then after 5 seconds it automatically deactivates them, so we can reuse them again as we go along. Now if I do the same as what I did a few seconds ago, where I went down the entire 30 items, you just take a look what happens. Now you can see them all starting from above down here. They're all starting to deactivate themselves. Now, all 30 of these are now deactivated. So if I just press space again, I'm going to start reusing these items from the top of the pool here, as you can see. And I can do this now continuously. I can spawn as many of these explosions as I want within a 5 second window for this time period, for this particle effect. And it will just constantly spawn from this same pool of items. We're not using any extra resources for this. We're simply reusing all of these objects again and again and again, which just makes the performance of the game much, much greater. So let's go ahead and stop the game here. Now we're going to go back into Visual Studio, because there's actually something else that I want to do in order to make our object pooler a little bit better performance-wise. And what I'm going to do is, what I tend to do usually when I'm creating, I'm going to create something called a singleton. So what I tend to do inside my scripts is I create a new C# script, and I call this a mono singleton. And this is just a base class that we can extend any other class from and create a singleton out of any class that we wish in the future. So what I'm going to do first and foremost here, so I'm going to make this an abstract class. So public abstract, I'm going to keep this as mono singleton. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go brackets T. And then inside the mono behavior, I'm going to say where our T is of type mono singleton. And then I'm going to say T, which is of the type. Oh, I don't want that. Okay, and then I'm going to get rid of all of this in here because we don't need any of that. And in fact, we don't need any of these either. And then we're going to say class within there, and we're going to say private static T, and we'll say for this underscore instance. And then we're going to create a public static T instance. And then we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to say get. So if our instance is null, i.e. our instance doesn't exist as yet, let's just go ahead and do a debug within here. And we'll say doesn't exist. And then from here, we're just going to go ahead and return the instance. And this is just, it's basically it's just a null check to make sure that if the singleton that we're trying to call from here hasn't been created yet, we're not going to crash out the game. So now what I want to do is I want to create a awake. And inside here, we want to set that to be instance, and we're going to set it to an instance of what we've just passed into the abstract class here as T. I'm going to say instance T, and then we're going to set it as this. And that's all we need to do for our mono singleton. Now, this is just going to be a base class that we're going to inherit from in other mono behaviors, just so we can easily create a singleton. And I'll show you how easy that's going to be right now. So if I save that and I go into our object pooler, all I need to do now inside here is change this to be our mono singleton, which inherits from mono behavior, so it's still a mono behavior. And then inside here, I just need to go ahead and add our object pooler. And that's it. So this object now this whole class is now an abstract class. It is a static class, which means we're able to call it from anywhere within our game. So if I go to our actions again here, you see how we've created an object pooler and we've had to give it an instance. We don't need to do that anymore. What we can actually do is we can get rid of that instance, and let me just save and go back to Unity. And then if we go back to our main camera, you'll see now that we've still got our object pooler that's set up inside here, but we don't actually. Why isn't that saved? Oh, I don't know why that hasn't saved. 1 second, let me switch back to Visual Studio. This is how developers work. They don't always do everything correct straight away. And if you see a lot of video tutorials on YouTube where they do things straight away that are all correct, it's likely been edited. Obviously, there are people that are able to kind of just sit down and do a lot of code, but it's really hard when you're doing a video as well and switching between lots of different software to make sure that you guys can see it, to keep things consistent. So let me just go ahead now, and inside our actions, you see, because we haven't got a pooler here now, because we've no longer got the reference to it. So if I just go ahead and instead of pooler here, what we can now do is we can say object pooler dot instance, which is the only instance that we now have of our object pooler within the game itself. And it does the exact same thing within this class, but it enables us to, this object pooler is now one instance over the entire game itself. So we no longer have to reference it in any script. We can just call it by its actual instance that's already created. So let's go ahead, save that out. And let's go back into Unity. And if I press play, you'll see that I can now go ahead and start spawning our objects again. I'll go all the way down to the bottom and then start again, and you can see they start back from the back of the queue. And there we have it. We now have a fully working object pooler that will enable us to go ahead and create pools of any type of object, game object that we require. and it will enable us to spawn and add them back into the queue and just continuously reuse them, making the performance of our game much, much prettier. So I understand that I made quite a few mistakes with my typing, etc. with that. I don't care. This is, I'm trying to do several things at once, and I'm not used to doing YouTube tutorials. I will get better at it, but if you find that this tutorial was helpful, please go ahead, subscribe to my channel, give it a like, let us know in the comments if you'd like to see something different, if you'd like to see them done in a different way, or you'd like to see tutorials on some other kind of functionality. Please do let me know in the comments below, and I'll see what I can do there. I will leave links to a Filebase and Game Dev HQ in the description below. So I do have a lot of tutorials planned in the future, and there's going to be a complete game series on how to make your own survival game, survival horror game. And that will include a ton of individual tutorials that will enable you to build up all of the individual pieces of the framework to get you to a point where you're able to start piecing them all together to actually make your fully fledged game. So again, if you found this video helpful, go ahead, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified of my new videos, and I'll catch you later.